So I was just laying here pondering things as usual, and I try to connect with the spirits and such. And something just kind of came to me. I realized that post-traumatic stress disorder can actually be categorized if you want to make it as accurate as possible for the diagnosis in order to be able to efficiently be able to aid the treatment of it, to be able to help the soldiers specifically, not just soldiers, everybody, but specifically, this is for the soldiers. Um, the idea is there should be three different types of, I guess it would be like types. It would be like type 1, type 2, type 3, or type A, B, or C, or whatever else they want to use to symbolize that. But the idea is there's post-traumatic stress disorder that is mainly triggered or sustained by grief, and then there is post-traumatic stress disorder that is mainly grief or loss. And there's another type that could be mainly categorized by mainly brought on and sustained by the fear, the trauma of your own suffering. And then, of course, these can overlap for whatever extent. But then there's also a type of post traumatic stress syndrome that I just thought of. And that would be more along the lines of your moral compass. I think I'm saying that right. Or your general overall belief system. Say you've had a sheltered life and you never really had to deal with the trauma of the outside world. For a soldier, that would be the American lifestyle, going over there and having to endure all the trauma, the things that, and your sadness, your sympathy or empathy, that it's so strong that it overwhelms you. And so it's kind of like a type of culture shock. But then there's also a more religious aspect to it all, which is something that is not necessarily related to military like trauma. This would be just an overall general type of trauma. I'm sure military would obviously endure it as well. But if you can really sit there and take these three different types of PTSD, they're all PTSD, and I mean, according to the DSM, they would all be categorized as such. But initially, this was some sort of like shell shock, I think was the term they used for it. Like, post-traumatic stress disorder was initially put in the considered an actual diagnosis. I think it was in the 80s. It was in the DSM-3, I think, was the first time that PTSD was actually a viable diagnosis. And so what happens is that over the course of time, they update the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and now we're at DSM-5. So they need to update once they have the new update, and they need to like do a lot of research in the meantime, obviously, to be able to prove this. But there's three different categories of PTSD, which would aid to simplify the treatment and the management of the disorder, because it's a type of disorder that is characterized mainly by at least one of the two. One of the three can be characterized for sure. I'm sorry, that can be mainly, I guess, managed or, treated. It would be more of a cognitive reprocessing. So it would essentially be like a type of cognitive reality therapy mixed with a very intense and very, I guess, really intricate and careful type of processing, and possibly pair that with some sort of escape type therapy or coping, which would be like art or music or nature or something along those lines. And so that would be generally, once you can actually um, take your mind and retrain it, because what it's a type of, it's just, I call it shell shock for lack of a better term, but it's just a shock of reality. It's like, this is all I've known, and especially when it's your core beliefs, it's like coming out of a Christian upbringing and realizing that, oh my gosh, this is actually happening around the world, just like the Bible says it's going to, something like prophecy fulfillment. And then you look, that's one of the things I have to deal with. It's kind of really bad for me. But then there's also the trauma associated with, and this is something that I really have a hard time with, is the corruption within the government. And it's not the government is corrupt, it's just that the people are corrupt, but the corruption is so subtle. And the reason why it's so subtle is because inherently the people don't have corruption as their intent. It's like their intentions are pure, their intentions are sincere, but the way they go about things is where the corruption comes in. And everybody's guilty of it, every single last one of us. If we're breathing and we're interested and we're aware of what's going on and we want to get involved, trust me, every single one of us has that corruption within us. But the severity of it, as it applies to the monopoly of our government, of our economy, of our day-to-day existence, we can see it on a macro perspective, and we can, complain about the macro perspective, but it's the micro perspective that the macro perspective kind of hems in. It makes the micro perspective really difficult to deal with. And so, like, that's one of the traumas, but those are just examples based on my actual experience, which is why I kind of thought up this idea. And so that's a really huge factor, is someone's beliefs, their values, their moral compass, when that has been transgressed on such a severe thing, such a severe magnitude, that it is like kind of all around you and there's nothing you can do about it. With that powerlessness is one of the things that causes that to kind of evolve into a type of post-traumatic stress expression, and an internalized experience of the post-traumatic stress syndrome. The other thing, like I said, was grief, loss. And this goes back to our military and the experience. These last two are really important for them. And this is something that I think would really help our veterans if it were to be more, widely taught, researched, and presented. And so that's why I want to make note of it. The idea of the loss, the grief, it's so severe, paired with the severity of the experience. It's not something as simple, and forgive me, I'm not trying to downgrade or diminish any of the significance and the severity and the heinousness of any sort of murder or anything like that. But when they're over there, and the IEDs was a huge one, and the way that the heinousness and the nonchalant nature of heinousness, the way that it's just this nonchalant way that they torture, and the specifics of how they do things with people. It's a whole nother category, like it's a whole nother level. It's like another blanket on top of the blanket already of the severity of constant loss and constant fighting for your life. And last and certainly not least, but last, I've got 50 seconds left until this cuts off. There's also the trauma of course, the experiencing the constant danger and stuff. And but I think the big thing is to put those into 3 different types. And of course there would be a subtypes within that would be a mixture of one or all 3 of them. But if you specify those 3 different types of post-traumatic stress syndrome, what you end up getting is a much more manageable prognosis. And the treatments are very different also. not always, but they can be, and it would be very beneficial. I've got 3 seconds now, so I'm going to go ahead and end, but I hope this is